I've been thinking about our military's departure from Afghanistan this past week, as I imagine many of you have. The shocking scenes of desperation at the airport, the colossal 20 years long sacrifice of life and money, the results that have evaporated in a matter of weeks. The hubris in our national character that convinced us we could somehow achieve in Afghanistan what we, in living memory, had so utterly failed to accomplish in Vietnam. And the betrayal of all those Afghans who risked their lives to build a democracy with us, many of whom will now be left behind. One New York Times article this week indicated that our current pace of evacuation, some 120,000, almost half of those who worked with the U.S., will not be evacuated even though they qualify for visas. Such a heartbreaking situation, such a betrayal of our friends and allies. I wince to hear our words from Deuteronomy today. You must observe my laws and statutes diligently, God tells the Israelites, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people. And, there's been a lot of finger pointing about all this in the punditry, and I'll admit I've participated in some myself. It's Biden's fault for planning the withdrawal so poorly. It's Trump's fault for making a bad deal with the Taliban and for backlogging the visa program. But the truth is that the tragedy and disaster we are witnessing has been 20 years in the making. And really, it was set in motion in the days immediately following the 9/11 attacks, with near universal support by both parties and all of us who elected them, and I include myself in that group. Now, I say near universal because out of all the members of Congress, there was one prophetic soul who tried to prevent this debacle before it got started. Her name is Representative Barbara Lee. She cast the lone no vote on the authorization to use military force that Congress otherwise unanimously handed President Bush, which is a necessity under our Constitution since presidents cannot conduct war without a congressional mandate. And the reason she voted no, according to a Radiolab podcast and interview on the subject, is not because she didn't agree that Bush needed to be empowered to respond to the 9/11 attacks with force. That wasn't the problem for her. The problem was that the language of the act was too broad. Not unlike the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which had permitted LBJ to really mire our nation in Vietnam, this act gave our president almost unlimited military authorization. So as the time to vote drew near in that moment 20 years ago, Lee wrestled with what to do. She stayed up late. She prayed. She called friends and advisors. She really wanted to unify behind the president in this time of crisis. But as a former psychiatric worker, she also knew that the nation was in a collective state of shock and fear, and in such a state, it is wisest not to leap to major decisions. The defining moment for Lee came at the National Memorial Service 3 days after the attack. A Reverend Nathan Baxter read a passage from Jeremiah 31, which gave voice to the lamenting and bitter weeping of the people. Then he said a prayer for the victims, for national healing, and for, quote, divine wisdom that as we act, we not become the evil that we deplore. That as we act, we not become the evil that we deplore. That phrase, at the sound of that phrase, Lee recalls, she became calm and peaceful. She knew how she was going to vote. And she paid for that vote. Colleagues tried to convince her to reverse it. She received over 60,000 citizen letters, most of them venomous with hatred. Some threatened her life. She had to hire security for her protection. And remember, Lee wasn't even opposed to the use of military force. She's the daughter of an Army lieutenant colonel, after all. She just wanted it more narrowly defined so it couldn't stretch on indefinitely. She saw the potential for the kind of Vietnam 2.0 that has in fact come to pass. Now, of course, we people of faith can honestly disagree with her decision, and certainly with her politics. But after untold deaths and billions of dollars, after torture and secret detentions without trial, after drone strikes in Blackwater and Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and warrantless wiretaps and summary executions and desperate Afghans falling to their death from departing C-17s, how possible is it to argue that we have not, at least in some way, become the evil that we deplore? Barbara Lee heard that warning phrase from the mouth of Reverend Baxter on September 14th, 2001. So did every other congressperson who attended the national service, Republican, Democrat, and Independent. But Barbara Lee alone acted on it. Be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves, James advises in today's New Testament reading. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror, for they look at themselves and on going away immediately forget what they were like. Friends, I don't know why the evil that visits our world sometimes seems so large and overwhelming. I don't know why there seem to be so few in power able to recognize and oppose it. So few who can look at themselves in the mirror and remember who they are. So few who manage to be doers of the word and not merely hearers. I don't know why those who resist folly and madness are so rarely able to prevail. Mr. Rogers famously advised that in times of violence and tragedy, it's good to look for the helpers. Rogers was a minister, so I think that we can take this advice as a kind of unstated theology as well. Where is God in this mess? God is in the helpers, the many caring people in the world, as he put it. I think Rogers is right about that. God does show up in the helpers. The acts of generosity and kindness and protection and sacrifice and healing. But I would add a second kind of person through whom God's light shines in those dark moments. I would say, look also for the resistors, the people who show wisdom and discernment when all others are rushing to act. The ones who are not only hearers, but doers of the word. The ones who even in the midst of crisis and pain, remain committed to the exhortation that we do not become the evil that we deplore. Amen.